Hi and welcome to another episode of MIMA TV. I'm Huda Mahmoud, head of the Center for Maritime Economics and Industries. Much of the work we do in this institute rests on policy and legislation, which ties every aspect of the maritime sector together, which is why I want to talk about the International Maritime Organization, the pillar of international maritime laws. Established following an agreement at a UN conference held in Geneva in 1948, the organization was formerly known as the Intergovernmental Maritime Consultative Organization, or the IMCO. It was created to regulate the shipping industry by providing instruments such as conventions, protocols, and codes for the safety of shipping. These instruments were created piecemeal and often in response to maritime disasters. The first meetings were held in London in 1959, and it had already begun developing some pre-existing conventions, most notable at the time being the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution of the Sea by Oil, or Oilpol, 1954. When the Torrey Canyon oil tanker ran aground the English Channel in 1967 and spilled approximately 120 tons of crude oil, it was the largest oil pollution incident recorded at the time. Thus came the recognition for further regulation to prevent oil pollution at sea. And with it came concerns about other waste from ships, such as sewage, garbage, chemicals, and even the packaged goods on board these vessels. Now fast forward to today. The IMCO, which was later renamed the International Maritime Organization in 1982, or the IMO, has more than 50 conventions and protocols. These instruments cover virtually every aspect of the shipping industry. For example, safety of navigation, tonnage measurement, liability and compensation, collisions, training and certification of seafarers, even piracy, search and rescue, wreckage, ship recycling, and many others. Most recently, the IMO is focused on the issue of polluting emissions from ships and to move towards zero emissions. The IMO's objective is to provide a comprehensive, fair, and effective regulatory framework for shipping. It sets the global standards and is the global authority on environmental performance of international shipping. So for the benefit of the global shipping industry, the IMO works to provide a framework that is widely adopted and universally executed. The IMO is governed by Assembly, which consists of all IMO member states, and the Assembly will approve all IMO decisions ranging from work program and financial arrangements to the election of IMO Council members. The Council is IMO's executive organ supervising the organization's work and reports to the Assembly. The Council performs all the Assembly's functions between sessions, except making recommendations to governments on maritime safety and pollution prevention. The organization's 40-member council is elected by the Assembly, which meets in regular sessions once every 2 years. Article 21 of the Convention on the IMO outlines the specific responsibilities of the Council. Other UN organizations may observe IMO sessions, and non-governmental groups can even be granted an observer status. The organization is responsible for over 50 international conventions and agreements, plus numerous protocols and amendments to these conventions. Some of the main conventions include SOLAS, MARPOL, the STCW, the MLC, the Law of the Sea, the ILLC, the FAL Convention, and the SUA Convention. Most conventions fall into three main groups. The first group is concerned with maritime safety, the second group is concerned with preventing marine pollution, the third is concerned with liability and compensation, especially in the case of pollution damage. Outside of these main groups, there are a lot of other conventions that deal with things like facilitation, tonnage measurement, illegal acts against shipping and salvage, and more. The committees that are responsible for the proposal, the review, and the adoption of the resolutions relating to these conventions are the Maritime Safety Committee, the Marine Environment Protection Committee, the Legal Committee, the Technical Cooperation Committee for capacity building purposes, the Facilitation Committee, to simplify the documentation and formalities required in international shipping. As of the time of this recording, the IMO has over 175 member states. Malaysia ratified the IMO Convention on June 12, 1971, and became an official member state of the organization since. The flag, port, and coast states have the primary duty to establish and maintain an appropriate and effective system in order to fulfill their commitments. And when it comes to complying with the IMO instruments, the member states that are parties to them can benefit from IMO's assistance to strengthen their capacities and increase their overall performance. And over the years, Malaysia has ratified 26 of 58 IMO conventions, all in the spirit of ensuring that safety and security of shipping and the protection of the marine environment is given priority, both locally and regionally. This year marks the 50th anniversary of Malaysia formally joining the IMO. And shipping is essential for Malaysia's development. As a country surrounded by two major waterways in the world, it has varied and wide interests, from geostrategy, the environment, marine resources, and its industries. Malaysia also has a significant commitment to guarantee the safety of the ships transiting through the Straits of Malacca. As for its role as a member state, Malaysia contributes to the various efforts in line with the IMO's initiatives. For example, Malaysia is committed to the maritime community and has delivered training programs to hundreds of participants from the IMO member states. This is carried out under the International Technical Cooperation Program, or the ITCP, where Malaysia has pledged to support strengthening human capacity between member states. And capacity building in training, education, resolving GHG emission issues, the seafarer issues, and promoting women in maritime are just a few examples. Shipping is the most efficient and cost-effective way to transport the majority of our goods. It is one of the most dependable forms of transportation, providing for 80% of global trade. So for any country that trades, shipping is a key component for long-term economic success. The world therefore relies on a safe, secure, and efficient shipping sector. Clear guidance and requirements painstakingly outlined by the regulatory framework ensures the safety of these activities, from ship design and building to staff and operations, disposal of waste, energy efficiency, and ecologically sound operations. More than that, it ensures that the ocean we rely on stays healthy and thriving. It does this by setting goals for sustainability. The IMO has, among others, adapted and continued to develop measures to, number 1, cut GHG emissions, number 2, reduce the sulfur content of ship's oil, number 3, implement the Ballast Water Management Convention, number 4, to protect the polar regions, number 5, reduce marine litter, number 6, improve the efficiency of shipping through the electronic exchange of information, and number 7, to meet the challenges of digitalization of shipping, and number 8, enhancing the participation of women in the maritime community. There are a few steps. To adopt the convention, the Assembly, the Council, and the committees will work on the conventions with the help of the member states, who can raise and discuss developments in shipping, making way for amendments in existing conventions, or a new convention entirely. The entry into force is the formal acceptance of the convention, and where the convention becomes binding to the government. Most multilateral treaties contain a clause providing that a state may express its consent to be bound by the instrument by signature, subject to ratification. In such a situation, signature alone will not suffice to bind the state, but must be followed up by the deposit of an instrument of ratification with the depository of the treaty. In the case of amendment, until recently, changes to the convention could only be implemented if 2/3 of the contracting states agreed to them. This usually meant that changing a convention required more acceptances than bringing it into force, especially if the number of parties was large. So to remedy this, the IMO devised a new amendment mechanism called the Tacit Approval. Rather than requiring the amendment to enter into force after it has been approved by, say, 2/3 of the parties, the tacit acceptance approach requires an amendment to enter into force unless a certain number of parties object before that date. And in the case of enforcement, the enforcement would depend on the contracting governments. They enforce the convention on their flagships and can impose penalties for violations. If an offense occurs within the jurisdiction of another state, that state may either initiate its own legal proceedings or notify the flag state, which may then take appropriate action. The application of its powers is carefully defined. and most conventions delegate primary responsibility for enforcing the conventions to the flag state's own ships and personnel. This is because the conventions cannot be enforced by the organization. One recent example is the crew change restrictions that came with the beginning of the pandemic. Movement restrictions left seafarers stranded for months on end at sea without hope of returning to land or transferring ships. The IMO worked tirelessly during this period to ensure guidelines and SOPs were available to protect seafarers. They churned out dozens of circulars to keep the shipping industry updated and to lend a voice to the seafarers. Malaysia and the IMO were involved in the efforts to rescue and guide these seafarers at the height of the movement restriction. And in another area, women empowerment. In November 2017, the IMO hosted the first regional conference on women in maritime Asia at Dili, Timor-Leste, with the overarching goal to forge cooperation between Asian women in maritime through a structured organization. Malaysia established the Women in Maritime Association, MIMA, as a national chapter to the regional initiative. MIMA provides support, networking, and a facilitating body for female seafarers. And the Ministry of Transport champions the association and encourages its growth in order to represent the needs of women in maritime. MIMA is also fully recognized by the IMO. Now, legislation-wise, the shipping industry in Malaysia enforces the conventions ratified from the IMO in its operations and is working towards updating its legislations related to the shipping in the country. The IMO framework calls for a thorough and ongoing review of its conventions in all aspects of maritime. But the benefits of the conventions can only be realized by member states through enforcement and through implementation. Each member state has its own legal system, challenges, and opportunities, and a lack of clear demarcation of responsibility and unclear legislation can hamper the enforcement of these conventions. It would be difficult to effectively adopt the conventions, as standards will have no basis for measurement, source of power to enforce the convention is vague, and the enforcers will be dealing with many loopholes, thereby endangering the sustainability of the shipping industry. Polluters, illegal shipping activities, dangerous flouting of rules are all threats that can be mitigated by clear national legislation that backs the conventions. The national legislation will empower the convention for each member state, something that Malaysia is working to accomplish. Malaysia has retained its seat as a council member in Category C for 8 consecutive years. At the time of this video, Malaysia is vying for its 9th year. The council member seat is important for Malaysia, always to keep a pulse on the latest decisions and policies in the sector, and to ensure our interests may have a voice in the international platform. I hope this snippet of the IMO helps provide a glimpse of the areas we can all work to improve. MIMA works in tandem with international and national goals, and we welcome discussions about the subject no matter where you're from. Thank you for your time, and see you again.